us in studying together. Of course we want to make a better world. How are we going to make a better world? Well, actually we need to have better relationships. What's the first relationship? Oh, sorry. Start again. So what's our purpose in being together? Of course we want to make a better world. Of course we want to deal with the real problems we're facing and resolve them. But how do we make a better world? Basically, it's got to do with making better relationships. And we have many, many different relationships which we have to improve. But what's the central relationship we have to improve in order to improve all the others? It's basically the relationship between myself and God. Because only then can I, understand who I truly am. Who I truly am is, first of all, defined by who I truly am to God. And of course, one of our big problems is we're not sufficiently aware of that. From God's point of view, God's very nature, the essence of God's nature, God's irrepressible impulse to seek joy through living for others, by making others joyful. That is the essential nature of God, which caused God to create in the first place. And God created a vast creation, of course. But in that creation, there's one partner of love that's very special to God, and that's the partner of love that most closely resembles the nature of God. And that, of course, is us, human beings. So that is who we are to God. And, of course, then what God is trying to do is share everything with us, to give everything to us. And in that process of giving everything to us, we are placed in a very special position to return everything to God. Because all the invisible beauty inside of God, that God cannot taste, that God cannot touch, that God cannot see, all that beauty is substantiated through us and the rest of the creation, of course, but fundamentally, most especially, into human beings. And then all that we're given by God, we have the chance to return it to God by allowing God to see all that beauty, invisible beauty within God, become substantiated and manifested, through our lives. So that's who we are to God. So God is in the subject. The subject gives love. The object returns beauty. So we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I'm not going to, because I've got to really catch up now. But these are some of the qualities through which human beings can return beauty to God. Filial piety, loyalty, faithfulness, trustworthiness, honesty, humility. There are also, of course, some very important qualities for us to engage in true relationships with other people. So the first relationship to build, the first partner of love, if you like, the first one, of course, that we receive from is the origin, God. But then when we take the object position, understand how much we're loved, and return that beauty, then actually that develops into a relationship where we seek to actively love God back. And that seeking to actively love God back, that manifests itself also by loving other people. So, the three objects purpose. Love for God leads me to profoundly understand how much God is loving me by giving my wife, and how much I can love God back by loving my wife and manifesting this beautiful relationship within God, harmony within God, in the harmony between myself and my wife, or in the harmony between my mind and my body. So we're going to examine about that, and we call it the three great blessings. Why? Because it relates to a passage in the first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:28, where God gives a blessing to Adam and Eve. He says to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and have dominion over all the things of the earth." So we're going to examine these one by one. Be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. But in essence, these three blessings, they represent the gift of love from God to us, but also by substantiating these three blessings, we're actually providing a gift of love to return to God. And this also profoundly expresses the relationship of God's love to our love and God's responsibility to our responsibility. So the first blessing. This relates to these dual characteristics. We call this one internal character, right? You remember? And this one external form. And it's resembling the nature of God, who has internal character and external form within his own being. And they're perfectly harmonized within God. So, the heart and emotion, intellect and will of God perfectly harmonized with the pre-energy within God. And God as the creator puts that into his creation and creates human beings. And when he creates human beings, we have dual characteristics, mind and body. And through our life, God designed us so that we can find the extraordinary joy and fulfillment of actually living a life through which we grow to become a true person. All the joy that comes from growing to become such a person who resembles God. And actually, interestingly, every person resembles God in a very unique way. No two people are the same, because God has so many different aspects. Fundamentally the same nature, internal character and external form are harmonized, but so many different possible expressions. You can realize this when you think about, for example, your own children. So you have more than one child, you have several children. Then actually they're each a combination of yourself and your wife, but they're all unique combinations and all have the potential to bring joy in a particular way. But what do you want to see in your children? You want to see them becoming people of maturity, people of love, people of true character, people of integrity. And how does that happen? That happens actually when they bring God's love and truth down into substance in this world, in this place. This is the place where mind and body meet. So, how do we connect to God? Of course, we need to comprehend the love of God, but also very importantly, we need to comprehend God's truths. So, where is love and truth received? In one sense, it comes first of all to the mind, because we have the capacity to understand about the love and truth of God, and then the mind as the subject directs the body responds to the mind. But actually, where that truth and love becomes fully manifested is where mind and body are bound together in a unified relationship, where love and truth are manifested in that person's living. And then that mind and body unite together and they make this. In this ideal person are these two aspects, the mind aspect and the body aspect united. This creates a force of give and take action through which the person grows by living a life where their good mind, where their good thoughts directs their body in good actions. And the body responds to the mind and they unite together and the person grows to resemble God. Or grows to fulfill their personality of truth. So we can imagine how beautiful that is to parents to see their children growing in that way. We can imagine what an amazing gift it is to God, that from God to us, that we have that possibility. And what an amazing gift it is from us to God when we can manifest this ideal person as the object partner for God, through which we have to add our own portion of responsibility to God's investment by the way we live our life, by the way we substantiate the love and truth of God in the way that I conduct myself. So another way to see it, and we mentioned about this before, is the relationship between God and the ideal person is also like the relationship between the mind and the body. And the ideal person is the physical manifestation, if you like, the substantiation of God. The invisible God takes on visible form in the ideal person. This God the parent, God the child. And this manifests itself when this person puts together their mind and their body through a life where they take their good thoughts and put them into good actions. And they become a person whose words, whose ideals, whose set of values are daily manifested in the way they live their life. Word and deed become one. Person of integrity. Who do we respect? Why do we respect, Aung San Suu Kyi? Why do we respect Mother Teresa? Why do we respect Mahatma Gandhi? Because they had very high ideals, but they absolutely practiced them in their daily life. They were people of great integrity. They were people who manifested this quality of love and truth coming from God. So these are references to that goal in life and that request from God, in a sense. Be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. Or in 1 Corinthians, you yourselves are God's temple and God's Spirit lives in you. Love God with all your heart and soul. So this is the first step, if you like, or the first gift from God, the first blessing from God, that we can return to God, that we can bring joy to God by manifesting that, by substantiating that in our lives. So what's the second blessing? It was referred to in the Genesis passage, that first one, as be fruitful. This second one is referred to in the Genesis passage as multiply. And it's on the foundation of the first blessing. So who's this person? This is the ideal husband. What does this mean? This means that this person's mind and body have become completely one in an ideal personality resembling the nature of God, or reaching a certain level of maturity where that person can manifest the truth and love of God in their lives. And who's this person? This is the woman, similarly, who's brought together her mind and body in unity, centered on God. So the next level of blessing from God is God created this possibility for the masculine aspect and the feminine aspect that are perfectly harmonized within God. That harmony, that beautiful harmony between masculinity and femininity within God, that's invisible, and God himself cannot touch and taste, now becomes manifested in the masculine expression of God and the feminine expression of God becoming one in love. So where's that love of God and that blessing received? Of course you might say it's received by the husband who initiates the relation, the wife who responds, but actually it's received here. It's where that truth and love of God becomes manifested in the beautiful relationship between the husband and wife, the oneness between husband and wife in love, where they more fully manifest God in all God's beauty than they ever could as an individual, because God is the harmonization of masculinity and femininity. So this man can never fully represent God. This woman can never fully represent God. It's when man and woman become one in resemblance to the beautiful oneness within God that God is more fully represented. First of all, if you take out child there and you put union, right? This is first of all the union between husband and wife. But in, of course, the relationship between husband and wife, that union is manifested with the union between the seed and the egg, out of which the child is conceived, out of the love of God. So, if you like, the love of God comes down and finds a home and a resting place, a place to manifest itself. This vertical energy of love manifests itself horizontally in the substantial reality of this man and this woman united in love. And then that love of God which finds its home there gives birth to this child. So this child is in that sense, through the parents, also the child of God. Father Moon expresses, in a sense, the physical parents give birth to the physical body of the child, but each child's spiritual element is breathed into each by the breath of God. So through the agency, through the collaboration between God, the heavenly parent, if you like, and these parents, the earthly parents, and the love of God comes down and gives birth to each and every person. So each and every person is the child of God. But of course, what will be very important is, can the love of God find that resting place? Find the quality of relationship here that is the fulfillment of what God imagined, in his heart, out of his love. Can they turn it into substantial reality? So this is a very profound matter. Father Moon talks about, I remember the first time I heard him talk about this, and I got invited to go to Alaska. I used to spend a lot of time in Alaska. And right up there, in a sense, in the wilderness, a lot of fishing, a lot of nature. Very beautiful. And he shared about this concept of the 4 great loves and how love develops in the family. So here's the love of God coming down, God's masculine and feminine aspects. Love of God coming down. Here's the husband, here's the wife, meeting to make the place where the love of God can reside, and then pass from them as parents to the next generation. Love of God finding its home here, residing there, God residing. So when husband and wife meet each other in love, it's not just husband and wife meeting each other, it's this horizontal effect meeting this vertical cause. Maybe that sounds very technical, right? But this is a meeting of love, because how do I know my identity? I have to know I'm the beloved child of God. And this is, I'm the beloved son of God, this is the beloved daughter of God. And what did God design us for? God designed us to live for the sake of women, to manifest in substantial reality the beauty within God. And from that place where the love of God comes down, it passes to the next generation. So how does love grow? When that child comes into being, could be a male child, could be a female child, that child receiving the love of parents naturally, because parents and children are also a pair system, right? Subject of that child with a son's heart responds to the parents, or with a daughter's heart responds to the parents. And it's, of course, everybody's heart is unique, everybody's nature is unique, but we can make this sort of broad category, of masculine and feminine, also in the relationship of your sons and your daughters. Different type of quality. But this heart of a son or a daughter, child, to respond to parents, this is children's love, right? This develops and grows over time and becomes the foundation. Son's love becomes the foundation for brother's love. In other words, it's my parents' love for me that was the cause of my love for my parents as a son, or my love for my parents as a daughter. And that love I received from my parents, which caused me to love them, becomes the foundation to love my brothers and to love my sisters. This is siblings' love. So our love for one another within the family is rooted in the love we receive from parents. So the more each child truly feels special and truly feels loved, the freer they are to love others, right? Or you see it in life, within the family, beyond the family. I studied to become a social worker at one point in my life. We studied a lot about child development and child psychology. So where is the fundamental development of the child which will determine their capacity to relate for the rest of their life formed? It's formed in that intimate relationship between parents and children in the first weeks, months and years of life. So many people say it's what develops within those first 3 years of life and your capacity to understand how you're loved and respond in love, which will determine your ability thereafter to build relationships of love. So this is very profound. So love of parents and love back to your parents becomes the foundation to love yourself, to become a subject of love, to live for others, your brothers and your sisters. And then these two together, son's love and brother's love, see here and here, the blue and the white, representing these two, they combine together. This one, son's love, is the foundation for brother's love. They can become combined together. They are combined together through the maturity by practicing love as a son, practicing love as a brother, practicing love as a daughter, practicing love as a sister, develops this level of maturity on the basis of which this man and this woman embark on a new level of relationship, something completely different from this one and this one, a new type of love, child's love, siblings' love, spouse's love, a new realm of love, completely different realm of love. And this very important realm of love must make this place so again the love of God can come down and pass to the next generation. So whilst in one sense parents' love, if I push the button, Sorry, pushed the button too much. This is meant to show how God's love, passed by parents, turns into children's love, brothers and sisters' love, conjugal love, and parents' love. So in a sense, parents' love is encompassing of all of them. It contains them all. Each one builds on the next. Each one contains the next. Part of parents' love is conjugal love. Part of conjugal love is brothers and sisters' love. Brothers and sisters' love is children's love. So, all the four great loves are encompassed in. So in one sense, parental love is the greatest love, and the one which most totally resembles the love of God. But in another sense, this one is the most crucial love, this one here. Why? Because it will decide whether there's a place that can receive the love of God, contain it, and pass it to the next generation. So Father Moon expresses very clearly, this is the most decisive love. And that's why he's emphasizing all the time, preparation for marriage, commitment in marriage, motivation in marriage, and how much can you secure this place that means you can pass the love of God to the next generation. Because if we cannot pass that love of God, of course that makes it very difficult. If you don't have parents' love, how can you have children's love? Because parents' love causes children's love. Another very important point that he emphasizes very much, which is very important to comprehend about how to make this work, is this meeting place and how I just redid these diagrams just before the lecture actually. I'm trying to represent God has the masculine aspect and the feminine aspect, right? By giving the letters a different color. Can you see? So man is but one aspect of God, one half of God, if you like. The other half of God is here. This is one half, this is its matching half. So man and woman meet together in the place of love. This is a very sacred place, a very holy place. And substantially, realistically, where do they meet such that children are born? They meet in sexual life. So Father Moon's very clear about something we need to get very clear if we're going to create a better future for humanity. And that is, this place is very important and should not be undertaken lightly. It should be a relationship of love which is a manifestation of the love of God, which is rooted in the highest form of living for the sake of others, coming from the deepest heart. In other words, this is such a holy relationship and something so crucial for the next generation, and so crucial for the happiness of this man, this woman, you can even say for the happiness of God, to allow the love of God to become manifested in the world. So, how we relate in this way is a place where, how does love get manifested? Love gets manifested, or love develops, when you behave in a way that's according to love. So, I don't know if you remember me saying this before, but what are laws? Laws are the code of conduct decided by love. So the way that we relate to each other and respect each other, that will have a very, very big impact on whether love arrives between us. The etiquette of love, do you understand? How we respect each other, how we talk to each other, how we speak to each other, how we value each other, how we behave faithfully to one another. This will be enormously important. So, Father Moon's very much expressing we need to transform the world in this matter. We need to lift this up. Generally speaking, in all the great religious traditions, there are very strong laws about how we love one another. There are laws about many things, all to do with relationship with God, relationship with parents, relationship with others. But this is one of the most crucial and profound ones, because it will decide how much the love of God can come and pass to the next generation. So Father Moon's saying is, a man's sexual love belongs exclusively to his wife, and a woman's sexual love belongs exclusively to her husband. He says, actually, he uses the key and the lock type of simile. He said there should be one key. So the owner of the man's sexual organ is the woman, and the owner of the woman's sexual organ is the man. And I don't know how profoundly I can get into it, but Father Moon actually expresses, because what's manifested in this created world originates from within God. You have to understand that the origin of your being comes from God. So this part of our bodies where we meet each other in love, this is the most sacred part of our body. And this relationship is the most sacred relationship. And it manifests something to do with the meeting within God, between God's own masculinity and femininity. Or if you like, the meeting between God's seed and God's sperm. Sorry, God's sperm and God's egg, which in a sense happens within God and then is substantially manifested in the relationship between man and woman. The third blessing, so men and women who become true individuals, fulfill the first blessing, perfect their personality, fulfill the second blessing, multiply, make that relationship of love central in the family. Then next, those people should establish a relationship with the universe in which they live, with their environment in which they live. This is to do with having ownership over all the things of creation. As is said in the biblical record, have dominion over the things of creation. So how should we relate to things? We cannot relate to things just freely according to our self-centered desire. We should appreciate that things are the beautiful creation of God. They're a gift from God to us. And actually we are placed in a position to love them, take care of them on behalf of God. So this meeting place between myself and things should be a meeting place that's true to the original vision of God, to the way that God would like to see people and things meeting one another in love. And creating through this very true and proper and correct way in which we meet in truth and love, then actually this becomes the dominion of love. Very difficult though for people to create that type of relationship with things if they don't have behind it the first blessing and the second blessing. Very difficult to manifest this if you're not a true person and if you're not establishing a true family out of which grows and develops a true society. In the Bible it mentions actually the created world is waiting with longing for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God, the people who can really love nature as God would wish it to be loved. So put all three together and we've got the three blessings. So these are a gift from God to us, but then in turn, because we need to substantiate this beautiful plan God had as a substantial reality, they should become our gift of love back to God. And this very central one, of course, spans from the family to the society, to the nation, to the world. So the quality of the individual will have the maturity of the individual in love will have a lot to determine the quality of this relationship, and that in turn will determine the quality of the family, and then from that the society and the nation. So, we talked about this before. What kind of person is the one who's fulfilled the three blessings? Well, fulfill the first blessing. Become a man of unity between words and deeds, practicing what we preach. Become a true parent, passing the love of God, making a place for the love of God to come down on earth and pass from parents to children. And then a true owner, maintaining a proper relationship with the creation. So, very interesting point. This is from this other content that Father Moon asked to be added. So I want to briefly mention it. Father Moon expresses actually everybody's in search of their original homeland. I really experienced this working with children who were separated from their own parents. As a social worker, I worked with a lot of children who were placed in alternative families because they couldn't live in their own family. And how profoundly damaging it is when the difficult relationship between parents and children has led to the fact that children had to be removed from their own families, put in another family for their own well-being and protection. Or sometimes, of course, it was because of death or illness as well. But to be separated from your own origin, in a sense, is a profoundly disturbing matter. That's why you see this phenomena that people are in search of their parents if they were not with their parents.
They're in search of the parents they never knew, or the parent they didn't know. This type of thing manifests. So Father Moon expresses, we're in search of our original homeland. What is the original homeland? It's actually my parents. In a sense, it's the seed which was sown in love from my father, and sown in the egg, which was, the love of my mother. The seed of true love from my father and the body of true love from my mother, united in one. That's my starting place. And even Father Moon expresses, that is but a substantiation in this world of the invisible seed of God and the invisible egg of God within God. You might think that's a very strange thought, but his logic in that is very clear. He's expressing everything that exists in this world is a visible manifestation of something within the invisible God. So who am I? Of course I am the product of the seed of my father and the egg of my mother. But if it was as God originally intended, when my father and my mother met in love, God would have been right there with them. And the visible meeting of sperm and egg that took place between them would have been the invisible meeting of the sperm and egg in a sense. So I am literally, he's expressing, the result of the love of God. The invisible love of God behind the more visible expression of it in my parents. So that's a very profound homeland that we're missing. I tell you, you cannot believe the angst. I mean, the desperate longing when you don't know where you come from and you don't have a relationship with where you come from. The ultimate sense of my own identity is knowing how much I'm the child of God and the child of my parents, who are the visible God in a sense. So this is a very, very deep matter. Also, very important coming from this is a very important thought about why do we marry. Of course we will marry because when masculine and feminine come together, they more fully resemble God. Also, you create this place. Do you remember that four-position foundation, the place in the middle? That's where the love of God comes down. You can possess the love of God. And you complete your own love through your partner, because actually you can't complete it by yourself. You need your partner. And who is that partner? That partner is the owner of your love. And in a very profound sense, the owner of the means through which you engage in love, out of which the love of God comes down on the earth and creates the next generation. That is the sexual. And then also through that marriage is what is happening. You are completing God, because God is a partner, a subject partner without an object partner, until God has human beings to fulfill the three great blessings, most central of which is this one. So God, to complete his own being, needs completed man and completed woman united in love. And then through that, God's love can multiply and expand out and create generation after generation of children for God. Okay, so I've now wildly out of time probably, but I'm going to go on to what is the final lecture. And this explains a lot of things about examining the mechanisms of how we grow spiritually. Obviously, we've been expressing the first blessing is about this one. It's about how we grow spiritually. So, in order to fulfill the potential that God has given us, in order to manifest God in visible form in my life, in the relationship between my mind and body, that's what we're going to examine here. Anyhow, one thing's very clear. Everything that's in the universe which we live in, nothing appeared first in its fully formed state. Everything's gone through a process of growth and development through stages. In other words, growth in this world, in this created world, always is a process over time. And that growth is developmental, and it's developmental towards a certain direction, towards the fulfillment of a certain purpose. We're expressing that because we're saying the Creator God created out of a purpose, out of love,
to have a partner over life. So growth is not just random. Growth is towards a certain purpose, because the energy of God, the universal prime energy, if this vertical energy, which then manifests itself in the creation through give and take action, is not just blind energy. It's energy which is coming from heart and love. It's energy with a purpose, energy to fulfill a certain plan, a vision in the mind of the Creator, which was to be manifested, through the give and take action in the created world. So our life is a very, very important part of that. This has a most amazing implication. The implication is God does not complete his own creation, particularly when it comes to human beings, because we have a part in completing the work of God through the exercise of our own responsibility. So we can also examine that in this section. So you'll know this as parents, right? As parents, you cannot complete the creation of your own children. You can sow the seed, and children can be conceived and they grow up, but the completion of their own maturity is not just down to the parents. We need to create the right environment, of course, for them to have the opportunity to grow, but we cannot complete the process. They have to do that. So here we go. Here's a symbol of growth. So the sprouting seed and the young sapling, and then ultimately the mature tree that in turn can bear fruit itself. So this is illustrating three fundamental stages: the formation stage, the growth stage, and the completion stage. Actually, this is rooted in what we talked about before. I don't know if you remember. We talked about the origin and division the origin, division, and union, this three-stage process. The seed, where can I put it? The seed that becomes stamen and pistil unite, becomes seed again, and then that becomes the origin again for the same process to repeat itself. It's rooted in that. So, another way to express it then in terms of human life, the first stages of our life, maybe we can liken it, if you want to put it more specifically, something like the first 6-7 years of life, the next 6-7 years of life, and the final time to grow to maturity and adulthood. But what the principle expresses is during this period of growth, this is expressing in terms of physical growth, this is governed by the laws of nature in a sense. So, of course I must eat and I must drink and I must take exercise, but provided one does those basic things, the physical body grows essentially through the autonomy of the way in which the laws of nature operate. But this is, maybe I'll go back to that. That's not the case in terms of our spiritual development. Our spiritual development doesn't happen like our physical development. Our spiritual development requires a much more profound input of our own portion of responsibility. So indirect dominion. During that period of development then, before we attain our completion or our maturity, before we reach our perfection in a sense. So perfection, please understand it in terms of coming to maturity or completing the process of growth. So I become adult, I become complete. This is expressing that during the period when we're still growing towards that maturity and completion, God cannot relate directly to us. It's a little bit like, when someone is an absolute master of something and they have a pupil, of course they can have a relationship with the pupil, but this relationship is based on trying to explain, by explaining rules and a code of conduct and behavior, how they can, by practicing it, gradually grow up to become like the master. But when the pupil grows through that process of development and discipline, right? So pianists, right? You can't instantaneously become the most accomplished classical pianist.
It's an incredible process. And the beginning of the process between the master pianist and you, the beginning pianist, is that they just tell you what you've got to do. You know, do these scales, practice 1 hour a day, every day, and bit by bit by bit by bit you'll grow. And then eventually if that child shows real promise and grows, eventually when they grow they reach a level where they could maybe, you know, the master could be on one piano and the people could be on the other, and they could be having something happen. Or maybe you think about people playing different instruments, jamming with one another, you know, this type of expression where they can play off one another because they're all masters. Do you understand? So it's expressing something like this about the period of indirect dominion. So the completed God, the perfect God, can only fully relate to perfect beings. All beings grow to reach perfection with Him. During this time of indirect dominion, God relates to us through the principles, through guiding us, through giving us a set of code of conduct, a set of rules, a set of laws, which we have to discipline ourselves and by practicing each and every day of our lives to grow to the point where we can at heart be one with God and freely relate on that level. So that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about perfection, we're talking about maturity and completion. We're talking about the achievement of the full potential given by God and the ultimate fulfillment of the purpose God had in our creation. This is what we're talking about. So, as we said, in terms of, in some sense, our own bodies, and particularly all the things of nature, basically, when these flowers grew, when the trees outside in the garden grew, they grew by the force of the principle. It was fundamentally an automatic process. But actually, when it comes to the growth of the human spirit, the growth of the human spirit is not something that happens just automatically. Of course, in order to grow into a true person, you need to receive ultimately from God, but many times, of course, it's through the religious text, it's through the religious founder, it's through your parents, it's through the priest, it's through the guru. You receive the truth and the love of God. You receive the guidelines. So that when you're there in the monastery, as the pupil, when you're there in the meditational class, when you're there as a disciple position, what are you doing? Basically, the master says something to you, and you only, in a very small way, comprehend what he's talking about. Even though it's extraordinarily simple in a way, you don't really understand it. But the master gives you a discipline. And if you maintain that discipline, then actually step by step by step, your spiritual nature grows, and you begin to understand what the master's talking about in a way you never understood at the beginning. Do you comprehend that? In other words, God gives us a code of conduct we should follow. In all the great religious teachings, there's a code of conduct there. It came to us through the sacred texts, through the religious founders, comes to us in this day and age through the imam, through the guru, through the priest. Hopefully also if it's embedded in our own families through our own parents. But then we must add to that our own self-discipline, our own practice of those principles in our own lives in order to grow up. Okay, so from God's side, if you like, God is always seeking to find the way to give us that code of conduct and to give us the potential, the capacity to completely pass through these stages of development. This is God's responsibility, if you like. But then our responsibility is to practice those truths, is to discipline ourselves with those laws and make our wholehearted effort. And then when you add this one to this one, then actually you can make this journey. This is a sort of give and take. But actually, it's in the context of, well, probably it's in another slide, but it's in the context of, what's generating the energy for growth. Because in order to grow, you need to generate energy. Energy is being generated by the give and take action between the mind and the body. We're going to look at this in detail later.
So centering on love and truth, centering on the revealed law, if you like, centering on the love of God, centering on the original ideal and plan of God, which means we have this amazing potential. We live our lives day by day, our mind guiding our body responding to our mind, generating give and take action. This force of give and take action enables me to grow. So that's really important, isn't it? Think about it. Who can pass their masters, without any effort? Who can get their original degree? Who can get through college and get the thing without doing anything? Without disciplining yourself to study. Who's ever had to write an essay? I remember writing my essays and trying to study this stuff and understand what it was about so I could write the essay. Or so I could do the mathematical work. I wasn't a mathematician, to be honest. How do you get to do that? To begin with, it's nonsense. You don't really understand it. And you work on it, and you work on it, and you work on it. And in the end, you find from your pen, or these days from your computer, it's flowing out, and you're editing, and finally you've got this piece of work. I don't know how it is for you. Maybe I'm too egotistical, I don't know. I used to enjoy reading the essays when I finished them. I wanted to read it again because I got it. Somehow I got it. And I felt good about it. I wanted to give it in. And by me listening to these thoughts, which I didn't really understand, and then struggling to study it and comprehend it and practice it and put it into something that made sense. But even more profound than that, it's not just academic learning. It's learning about life. It's learning to be a true person. It's learning to be a person of love. It's learning to be a person of integrity. It's learning to be a shining example. These are, incredibly important things. And they require our own effort in that way, to practice disciplines. And that's the period of indirect dominion. So, what sort of things are we developing when we're growing spiritually? We're developing our awareness of others and their needs. So obviously it's a very immature person. I worked in a family centre where the staff of the family centre invited families into the family centre, and we ate a meal with them. And we watched the interaction between the parent and the child. And something very serious was taking place, because we were deciding through that many times whether those children could stay with those parents or not. What an extraordinarily serious matter to be decided. And how we decided basically was how much the parents were aware of the needs of their own children rather than only aware of their own needs. When they related those children only thinking of what they needed and how they wanted the children to behave for themselves and no sensitivity or awareness of the children's needs, we had to follow the law. What was the law? The law was, number one criteria is the well-being of the child. Second criteria is the well-being of the child is genuinely secured through being in the place of their own family. But if the well-being of a child is not secured within their own family, the child ultimately must be removed from that family. What an incredibly terrible thing to have to happen. But that's how the assessment was made. How much are they aware of their own children's needs? Development of conscience. We need to develop this inner voice, this voice of God within myself, and my awareness of it, my ability to hear it, so the decisions of life we can make out of our best nature. Are we able to give love? Are we able to receive love? Tremendously important. It may sound blindingly obvious, but for many, many people, we discover in ourselves it's not easy to love. It's not easy to say the word of encouragement. It's not easy to share my heart. And some people, it's really difficult to receive love. Don't want to be loved. Don't want to receive love. So that's not a simple issue. And it's to do especially with that, of course, those early life experiences. Not to say they can never be recovered. They can be recovered. But it's not an easy process. And of course, ultimately, my sensitivity to God, which of course is very connected to this point. This is the place within me where I hear the voice of God. It's God within me. So, God, of course, is the incredible creator. God designed everything. It's out of God's heart that God found this amazing creativity. You think about it. Where does amazing creativity come from? Where does amazing art, amazing literature, amazing music spring from? It springs from the human soul. Human beings go through some experience that dramatically impacts their heart, and then out of that flows great literature, great music, great poetry, and so on. It's what motivates it. So from God's heart and God's vision, flowed the whole of God's creation. And God's creation is an amazingly complex creation. It's like this puzzle, It's all these different parts are all fitted together. But there's one part necessary to complete the whole creation of God. And this part is God is not able to create himself. This part is the part which is human responsibility. So God can make the whole circumstance in which we can have the potential to fulfill our lives, which means essentially fulfill the 3 blessings. But whether we fulfill it or not is not decided by God alone. It's decided by the fulfillment of my responsibility, added to God's responsibility. My responsibility being very small in comparison to God's. But if it's not added, all of the work of God comes to nothing. So of course this is again the angst of parents, right? The heart of parents. You invest your whole life and soul in your children, but in the end what they become will not finally be decided by you. It will be decided by your children. So what is the role of human responsibility then? It means God's investment, God's responsibility if you like, plus human investment together enable what God originally planned, what God originally envisioned, the will of God to be fulfilled. So these are various different biblical quotations, clearly manifesting that God cannot work without human effort. So how do you save the sick man? God maybe has some extraordinary healing power, but it cannot come down on earth without the prayer of faith. Or if you don't knock, how will the door be opened? How will you receive some very important insight or understanding if you're not really seeking for it? Ask and you will receive. So a very interesting relationship as well between responsibility and freedom. It's a very interesting point, and how closely they're interconnected to one another. So a quotation from the Old Testament: "Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse." This is God speaking to the Jewish people at the time of Moses. "Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, and the curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God." So in other words, what does it mean? It means, if you're teaching someone to use a very specialized, potentially dangerous piece of equipment, right? Some sort of big saw or major drill or engineering equipment. So when you teach them, of course you want to teach them to make very beautiful things, but also you have to teach them to be very careful and to be very safety conscious, because otherwise they can chop off their hands, they can do something very dreadful. Do you understand? So actually in spiritual life, keeping the law is very important. Because what is the law? The law is the way that the person of maturity will behave naturally. Because they're mature in truth and love, do you understand? But until you are mature in truth and love, the law will guide you to behave appropriately, even though you don't have the maturity of truth and love to guide you. Do you understand? So this type of point. So that's why we really need some guidance. Guidance from God, guidance from Scripture, guidance from the wisdom of the great people of the past, guidance from our gurus and our priests, guidance from our parents. And then by following it, actually we can speed our development, we can secure our development, and we can make our own discoveries and mature ourselves. So why did God then, in a sense, take the risk? I mean, it's very risky, isn't it? Would it not be better if we could just, especially in this modern day and age, right? We could just put in the chip, We just put in the chip. And then we don't need any laws, because the chip will already make him do everything exactly correctly.
Something like that. Is that the answer? When our children are born, instead of loving them and passing the truth and example to them, instead of doing that, we buy a chip and we put that in there instead. And actually, they will no longer have their own free will or their own decision power. Just they will be guided by the chip, right? And then the outcome is secure. No, actually, the outcome is not secure. Because what does that mean? Is you're removing from them their own capacity to love. Because, why do you keep the law? Why do you keep the law? It's because you recognize the love with which the law is given to you, and the keeping of it becomes the return of love from you to the one who gave it. Do you understand? It's not just laws. Law is given out of love, and law is responded to out of love. And it becomes the way that through the practice of that discipline, you receive the love of the teacher who can't make you a great pianist without you practicing, without your discipline. Giving to that teacher in great love. You follow it, and with the encouragement, with the heart, with the deep interest in your life that's coming from your teacher. Isn't that what teachers are amazing if they have that? If they have that. If they invest their heart, but they also have to make you work, right? They have to make you discipline yourself. But you feel the love behind it, and you want to do it. Do you understand? That's the sort of point. So what does it mean? It means we are not, we have a portion of responsibility. Why? Because through our portion of responsibility, we complete the creation of ourselves. Our parents cannot complete us. God cannot complete us. I have to complete myself. And by completing myself, I become a creator along with God. And I become qualified, in a sense, to have ownership over the creation, over the world that God made. Why? Because I became a participant in the act of creation. So, before you give somebody, a big inheritance of a business or a large farm or a big property or many animals to look after, what do you want to be sure? You want to know they've got the technical ability, do you understand? But you also want to know behind that they've got a lot of heart. They've got a real, they love it, you love it. They want for it what you want for it. And then you give it to them, do you understand? Because they have that capacity. So this type of point. So that's the qualification. In a sense, through investing in the creation of myself, I become qualified. I have the qualities of character to have dominion over things, and even in a sense over other people in some ways, on behalf of God. So God is the source of love. He created love to be the center of human life. And love is something that has to be freely given. So love cannot be commanded. So I have a big machine gun, and I'm pointing at my brother, and I'm saying, do you love me? And maybe he says yes. But can it be relied upon? Do you understand? Maybe not. Maybe not. If I turn my back and leave the machine gun, maybe I find the machine gun's pointed at me instead. It's not quite what I thought it was. So, love is by its nature something that love is inspired by love. Love is a response to love. Love is something that's freely given. And that's beautiful. So, when my youngest son was growing up, of course, after he reached a certain age, I wasn't holding his hand walking to school every day, and I couldn't decide everything that he did, and I couldn't tell him everything, and I couldn't closely govern his life. So because I couldn't do that, I hired 3 private detectives, and I installed CCTV cameras in his bedroom, on the route to school, and in all the classrooms. So I could absolutely control everything that was going on, and immediately, I would send a message through his earphone and tell him, don't do that. That's how I managed it. Don't you manage it like that? No, we don't manage it like that. And it wouldn't be satisfying as we did if we did. It's scary in a way, but it's profoundly satisfying when you see your children out of their own responsibility becoming someone who looks at them and says, hey, your son's really great. So great that he almost resembles you, Will. Careful. No. In the end, your desire would be that he or she is more than you. Wouldn't it be nice for me to know that my daughter, I admire her. She's more than me. Wow. I want to say that word. And in some moments I feel definitely I can justifiably say it. And I'm very, very happy to be with Sept. That is marvelous. That is marvelous. So, when we grow through that stage and we reach the direct dominion, what does it mean? It means that I reached that, I became the elite concert pianist that can relate to the concert pianist whose heart and love and education and discipline guided me to reach this point. And now, I can become as much as the master, but this is becoming as much as the master of love. It's becoming one with the master of love, so that you can manifest the truth and the love of God. You can manifest the nature of God. God is love and he abides in love. Abide in God and God abides in you. These words. So that's the ultimate goal, if you like, to be the person through whom God can manifest himself. And come down on earth and love this world, love nature, love other human beings, love your children, love the people you're responsible for, so on and so on, the people you're teaching, the people you're taking care of. So the direct dominion, if you like, is a perfect person is a substantial object to God and one with God. He feels how God feels, thinks how God thinks. And then he can be a true owner on behalf of God. He can literally act on behalf of God. So God dwells in that person as the mind dwells in the body. Okay, this type of meaning. So how does spiritual growth take place? Well, we know we've got a physical aspect, right? And we know that physical aspect. We know how to help it to grow. I'm probably going to skip a few slides here. But basically I want to say, who's not aware of their physical body here? When it comes around, well, actually I'm a bit behind in the lectures, so I think tonight, sorry to disappoint you, but we won't bother with dinner. We won't bother with dinner, and we just run through a bit, towards midnight.
Yes, it's good.
And then actually, maybe I've got so much to share that, maybe breakfast, I don't know if we should really bother with breakfast. And going for a swim in the sea, impossible.
Yeah.
Just cannot do it. So actually, if you miss a meal, generally you're aware of it, right? Or if you're thirsty, you're aware of it. You're aware of the things that your physical body needs in order to sustain its energy levels and its health, and actually to grow and develop when you're in the stage of growing. Sometimes it's good to stop growing, but there was a time when it was very important to grow. So that's the physical aspect. There's more slides here about that, I think. It talks about our physical aspect related to a physical world through our 5 physical senses. And I should spend longer on this, but I'm not going to. But we also have a spiritual aspect. And that spiritual aspect relates to the spiritual dimension through 5 spiritual senses. That's a very interesting point. It's expressing that although we're aware of a physical reality in our physical nature, we're often not aware of our spiritual reality and the spiritual environment in which our spirit exists. Have you ever noticed that the spirit of the people you're with affects your spirit? Have you ever been with people who are really challenging your own spiritual reserve? Do you understand? So much so that they're actually pulling you into their, selfishness or their misconduct. Or think of all the people that probably you saw on the television, all the riots in London. Some of the people, they never were in a riot ever before. They never broke into a shop and stole something. They just did it because there was such an atmosphere, do you understand? Which led them to do it. So, we are not existing we are a spiritual being and we exist in a spiritual environment. And we relate to that spiritual environment. So, when you're with somebody, sorry Jeff, didn't mean to flash you there. When you're with somebody, then actually if you have a good relationship, then actually, and you're really feeding each other spiritually, then actually you bring down lots of good elements and you can accomplish the most amazing things together through creating this spiritual environment together. So we have these 2 aspects. So this aspect, we know how to basically take care of it. We breathe the good air, we receive the warmth of the sunlight, we get food and water, and our body grows and maintains its health and well-being. But what about our spirit? Because our spirit is the
more profound residence of our value as a human being than our body. So I'm going to skip this now because I've got to try and finish. These are some examples of spiritual phenomena that you can experience. And this again is the fact that we relate to the physical world, we also relate to the spiritual world. So not only can we relate to the spirit of another person, we can even relate to the spirits that are not anymore in a physical body. That's, for example, my close relative here in her mind, a piece of music that is his favourite piece of music. And she would know he was there. Anyhow, I won't get into that too much. So what's our very special position? I want really to get to the last slides, but what's our very special position? Human beings exist in this world, but also in that world. So actually, they mediate between the two worlds. They're a mediator between the two worlds. The two worlds, the physical and the spiritual world, meet each other through human beings. Very interesting position. But also we're placed in a position to actually govern over the physical world. We can see how the man, with his extraordinary capabilities and inventiveness, can govern over the physical world, and how significant it is the way that we look after nature. Because truly, truly we are the stewards of the natural world. And even we might say, in many ways, the stewards of the universe, ultimately. Potentially we have that sort of capacity. And our spiritual nature also should govern over the spiritual world. Very profound point. What are we then? We are like a miniature universe. Our physical nature contains all the elements of the physical world. Our spiritual nature, all the elements of the spiritual world. We are a miniature cosmos. This is the whole cosmos. We are a microcosmos. A micro-physical and spiritual world, united and integrated in our own being. Very interesting role man is in. And that's also why man is in this very special position on behalf of God to govern over the complete reality of God's creation. You'll notice trying to make a distinction between the physical and the spiritual by this more colourful slide over here. Anyhow. So, what's the relationship then between the spirit and the body? I mentioned, physically, you might think dinner is the most important. Okay? If I deny you dinner, you're in deep trouble. But actually, if I deny you air, you're in much more serious trouble. Or if I deny you warmth, from the sun, you're in very, very deep trouble. You will not exist for very long. So the more invisible elements are actually the most essential elements. The more substantial elements, they're also enormously important. These are like positive elements and negative elements. Our physical nature needs them both in order to grow, in order to sustain its well-being. But we have a spiritual nature. So we know about this one. We'll not neglect this one. If we're cold, we put the heater on. If we're hot, we put the air conditioning on. If we're hungry, we'll eat. If we're thirsty, we'll drink. But what about my spirit? What am I doing for my spirit? How am I taking care of my spirit? How am I making sure my spirit got what it needed? How am I making sure my spirit isn't starving to death? Or thirsting to death? Or frozen to death? How will I make sure? What do I need? Well, actually we need something which equates with this one. What is the air and sunlight for my spirit? It's actually, in the principle, we use this terminology, we call it life elements. But what is that really? It's love and truth from God. Of course, you can experience that, religious people experience that coming directly from God. They have experiences of the direct presence of God and receiving the direct love of God. But also many times it comes through somebody else. It comes through the scriptural writing. It comes through the religious founder who may now be in the spiritual world, but whose writings and life on earth is profoundly influencing my life. It comes through my guru, who's alive, my spiritual teacher. It comes through my priest. It comes through my imam. It comes through my elders. It comes through my parents. It comes through my role models. Ideally, it should be coming from God through all those sources. So absolutely, you place someone in a circumstance where they're not getting any love and not getting any truth, and they're in great trouble. You see a child placed in a circumstance
Why did we sometimes have to make decisions to remove children from their home? Because actually they were not getting love, and they were not getting guidance, and they were in great, great danger. And then also, we need another element. What is this other element? This other element isn't from God. It's not God's responsibility for that. It's not other people's responsibility. It's my own responsibility. How is that generated? It's generated through taking that love and truth that I receive from God and putting it into my daily life and performing good actions, and then receiving back energy from my own substantial acts of love, acts of truth, and acts of goodness. So without putting this love that comes to you, this truth that comes to you, into practice in your own life, you will not get any spiritual growth coming from it. So people can intellectually understand a lot about the Bible, a lot about philosophy, a lot about, all sorts of great religious truths. But if they're not actually practicing them, then they will not be spiritually growing. In a sense, they'll just be getting a bigger intellect, but they won't be getting a bigger heart. It's a very important type of point. So this is the positive element reflecting this one. This is the negative element corresponding to food and water. So this is profoundly true and very, very important. We need to make sure, just as much as we get air and sunlight, we need to make sure we're getting this. So, these saintly, holy people that we deeply admire, people like Aung San Suu Kyi, or people like Mahatma Gandhi, or people like Mother Teresa, they have a daily discipline. They're connecting profoundly to God through prayer and through their religious study, and they're continuously living a life of service to God and others, loving God through loving others. So there was Mother Teresa picking people up from the gutter who were being eaten alive by the rats and the insects, and feeling this is Christ. I must care for the body of Christ by loving this person. Through this type of practice, then, of course, incredible spiritual development is possible. So, if we take responsibility to live a good life, inspired by those life elements, and generate good vitality elements, I can develop myself into a person of maturity in love and truth. Or alternatively, if I fail to do that and live a life which is manifesting selfishness, manifesting wrong conduct, then actually I can become a very different type of person. That's ultimately my responsibility. So our actions determine our spiritual growth. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thanks very much for your attention all day today. It's much more difficult to listen than it is to speak, so especially when you're translating into numerous languages. So thanks a lot.